Hi, my name is Rami Ismail. I'm one half of Dutch independent studio Flambeer. Hi. We've sponsored a number of the talks here, two of the talks here today, and this is the second of the Flambeer sponsored talks. We invited Laura and Joe from Harmonious Games to come talk to us about starting a indie studio, basically straight out of school, and the challenges they've run into this. I've seen a different version of this talk a while ago, and it was one of the most honest versions of the first 2 years of independent game development talk I've ever seen. So if you want to be an independent developer and want to have your dreams crushed, but also a little hopeful story somewhere in the middle, then I think you'll get what you're looking for right here. Give a big round of applause to Laura and Joe.
Thanks, Rami. Cool. So I'm Laura and this is Joe. And our talk is called An Inconvenient Truth because we have learnt a lot of inconvenient truths over the last couple of years. And so we figure the best thing to do is to share what those truths are with everyone else. So just a little bit more about who we are. I'm the creative director and a co-founder of Harmonious. I run the creative team, but I also do quite a bit of the biz direction stuff now with Joe. And Joe?
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders with Laura. I'm also the studio director. So basically what I do in my day-to-day is I do a lot of the production, a lot of the business strategy, business development. Like, basically the way I always describe it is I do everything that has nothing to do with actually making the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty. This is our team back home in Melbourne, Australia. They're very excited for us to be here. It's a shame they couldn't be here with us, but we just wanted to show you all our team back home. We're actually in the process of hiring a new member, a junior programmer, which we've never hired anyone before, so this has been an interesting process so far, and I'm sure we're going to add another inconvenient truth in our next talk.
I hope not.
Yeah, hope not, but likely. Yeah. So what have we done? Well, we made Putty Pals, a ridiculously adorable, squishy game of teamwork to share with a friend. It is completely about cooperation and communication, and ultimately it's just super, super silly and adorable. We launched it on Steam in February this year, and then we launched it on the Nintendo Switch a couple of months ago, but I always think it was like 5 months ago, because it was such a huge thing, but Joe
it was actually only 7 weeks ago, which just, if a lot has happened since, I guess, yeah.
But for me, it feels like it's already been out for a year, which is not the case. So if you check out the game, let us know what you think. We're pretty stoked that it's on the Nintendo Switch now.
Yeah, a lot of childhood dreams lived with that one, so that was pretty cool.
Alrighty, so some main takeaways from the talk today.
Yeah, so basically like Rami said, we started Harmonious Games as a student team, like fresh out of university. We're all new graduates. So basically the main takeaways we want for you guys is just the idea that starting a company is super easy, and it's the running of the company that's super hard. Like Laura said before, it's full of all these inconvenient truths that, at least in back home in Australia, nobody ever told us. We kind of had to figure it out for ourselves along the way. And so hopefully through some of the things we tell you guys today, then you can kind of, learn from our mistakes, basically.
Ultimately, there's always still going to be a bit of this because, we're kind of still fumbling our way through running a company, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, you never really know what you're doing. You kind of just continue to make it up.
Yeah. Alrighty, so company structure was one of the main things that we didn't realize how important it would be to have. I mean, it seems really obvious, right? Like have a hierarchy, but we didn't really understand that it was important to actually have a proper hierarchy, like have bosses and then people underneath that, because democracy doesn't work when you're running a company. When we were at university, it was very easy to be democratic. Everyone is kind of having an equal say in how the game is being made, but that doesn't really translate to running a company. So very early on, we realized that we probably should have figured out what that hierarchy was.
Yeah, so like in the early days, we did assign things like creative director and studio director, but they kind of ended up just being titles that were self-assigned in the like probably first 6 to 12 months. Because we were slowly learning what it actually meant to be the director of a company and all the responsibilities that came with that. So this is like the financial responsibility, the legal, the ethical, like a whole bunch of stuff that comes with it. Because like ultimately, yeah, like you have to learn how to be the boss, and that's super difficult, especially with our backstory. Like we started university as a bunch of friends, so suddenly you go from, as Laura said, like being all equal to somebody having to tell somebody else what to do and what they think is more important and all that sort of stuff. And like, it's not something you normally do with friends. It's generally a democracy. Like, so it's one of those things that did take us a while to get our heads around.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we actually talked to the rest of our team about it, they were super cool with us being bosses and totally respected us, but it still felt really weird for us to actually be a boss. Like, it felt strange. So we had to learn to give ourselves permission to do that because everyone else was already accepting of it. So the third thing that was super important about company structure that was a super inconvenient truth for us, we didn't realize that having equal shares in a company was probably not a good idea. When we started Harmonious, there were 7 of us, and we all had equal shares. That caused issues and was also something we realized that didn't really make much sense. We were doing a lot of the running of the company, a lot of the maintenance, a lot of making sure that the company could run, but then we still had equal shares as everyone else. And it didn't really make sense. But at the time, we weren't really comfortable talking about that. Because again, you're all friends and it feels weird to be like, I think I deserve more shares than you because I'm doing more work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And this is something that's very relevant to us because we were 6 or 7, sorry.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're starting a company with 2 people, then that's a much more different conversation to have. So on that note, it's just like be particularly ruthless when you're picking your co-founders. So at university, we were a team of 9, and we were lucky enough that a few people dropped off along the way. Whether that was before we founded the company or the one person who dropped off in the first 6 weeks. And it made it much more manageable because I'm sure Rami can attest to this, like managing 9 people compared to 6 is so different. And like basically less is more when you're starting out. Like both from a financial point of view and like from a communications point of view, like it just becomes so much easier. So, and it's again, something that's really difficult when you're transitioning from university to the real world. It like basically telling somebody you don't want to work with them anymore is like, again, it's like this very uncomfortable thing to do. But ultimately, you've got to be honest with yourselves and the other people because, like we'll talk about a little bit later on, like it's only going to end badly for both parties if you don't have those difficult conversations right away.
Alrighty, so moving on. Company culture, not necessarily an inconvenient truth, just more of a truth we weren't aware of. Company culture is not something people really talk about when you start a company. It's not something that you think about.
Like we weren't even aware it was a thing.
Yeah, we had no idea.
Yeah.
We had no idea that we already had a culture around our company. But when we started thinking about it and started talking to more people in the industry about what their company culture is, we sat down and we kind of discussed what the main values we wanted the company culture to have. And for us, the biggest and most important one is that honesty is the best policy. And it's because of all of the mistakes we made early on. Potentially could have been avoided if we had open conversations with people, if we'd been more honest with each other.
Yep.
The thing about culture in particular is that it's kind of like a living organism. It's always changing. It's always kind of redefining itself. Like, for example, Joe and I being here in Utrecht is going to change the company culture back home while we're not there. that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just natural, and it happens because our personalities aren't there. They aren't changing the dynamic.
Yeah.
So the important takeaway here is that there's not necessarily a rule book for company culture. It's more that if you can be aware of what your culture is like, if you can be aware of what each person, your team's personality is like, and how that complements and doesn't complement other people in the company, the better off you'll be.
Yeah.
Because the more likely you'll be to see when there's a bit of negativity going on or something, and you can address it.
Yeah, because like culture at the end of the day is this very like intangible thing. Like something like like cultivating is a great word for it, because
Yeah.
it's just like it's something you just have to constantly keep working on, because in our first year we weren't, and it created a whole bunch of issues for us that we're going to go into a little bit later on.
Yeah. So one way of keeping on top of culture is by having regular check-ins.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that we kind of started doing over the last kind of 6 to 12 months. Because we found we weren't having these open and honest conversations just in our daily running of the company. We decided that, okay, we're going to set aside time every 2 to 3 months for these formal check-ins where myself as studio director would sit down with everyone else in the company for about 60 to 90 minutes. And during these chats, we would chat about like what their career goals were, how that lined up with where Harmonious was going. If they had any personal issues at home they weren't comfortable bringing up in front of everybody else, but they would like at least somebody at the company to be aware of. And just a whole bunch of like, there's very like more intimate discussions, just the stuff that just doesn't come up naturally when you're trying to make a game. Like, it's just not something that pops into your head.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of how we formally try and have this honesty policy. We also have this informally as well. We have this culture of constantly trying to check in with one another, and like often like I'll just be like, hey Laura, do you want to go get coffee? I just want to like chat about this, this, and this. And it's just because we've learnt the value of just having difficult conversations and not letting things kind of like not dwelling on things and stuff like that.
For example, our artist has been moving apartments recently, and he's been so stressed out because it took him ages to find a place, and then he had troubles with the real estate agent, and then, you know, moving was really difficult, and he was very stressed out, and he kept apologizing that he was taking calls all throughout the day, and then apologizing that he wasn't going to be there for half the day for moving, and we were like, dude, it's totally okay, like, you know, that's a huge deal. Like, take your time, sort it out. We'll be here, and your work will still be here when you're ready. And the best thing about that is that he felt he could tell us that he was stressed out in his own personal life, so that we could make sure that work life was good for him at that time. Now, this is my favorite part about our company culture.
Yeah.
Does anyone play Overwatch here? Yeah, all right, nice. So for us, we play Overwatch every single Friday afternoon. And it's not necessarily about Overwatch, though it kind of is. It's more about the fact that it allows us to relax, and it allows us to unwind from the whole week. It starts off with Kebab Fridays. So we go and have a kebab at 12 o'clock every single Friday, and we have lunch for an hour all together, chat about how good kebabs are, and then we go to Aldi and we buy the cheapest bottle of red wine that we can find, which is usually about $2. It's one way to save money. And so then we come back to the office, we have about 2, maybe 3 hours more of work, and then at about 4 o'clock, we say, like, tools down, essentially, and everyone stops working, and it's Overwatch time, and we play Overwatch for, like, the last 2 hours of the day. And it's become everyone's favorite part of the week, not because work is awful or anything, it's just that it's something that you can look forward to, so it makes getting your work done feel a lot better, because it's like, oh sweet, I got all my tasks done, now I can kick ass in Overwatch. And it's perfect because there's 6 of us in the team, so we fill out the perfect Overwatch team.
Yeah.
Although Joe and I both play support characters, which is frustrating at times.
Yeah,
I'm a Lucio main, he's a Mercy.
Yeah.
So Anyway,
causes a little bit of tension at times, but it's all right.
sometimes, yeah.
But yeah, like one of the best things about it is even though we're working together in a team constantly on the game, like there's not many moments where all 6 of us are working together in the moment.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that we get out of Overwatch. You kind of like, it's very like the team buildy
Yeah,
aspect
it
of
really is.
great,
And
yeah.
it's just a chance to blow off steam that you don't get
For
to
sure.
during the week. So if you've been feeling particularly frustrated with some kind of task you've been doing, kind of weirdly comes out when you play Overwatch and you just get that little bit more like intense.
Yep.
And then afterwards you feel good because you've had that chance to blow off steam. And it allows people to go into the weekend and leave work not worrying about the tasks they left unfinished or the emails they hadn't replied to or the new tasks they've got to do next week. Instead, they leave the office having had just a fun afternoon with the team, and then hopefully that means that they go into the weekend more relaxed and come back more refreshed on Monday. So that's why Overwatch Fridays are super important in Harmonious.
So yeah, on to the next topic,
Yeah.
which is one that we always kind of struggle to start talking about.
Yeah.
But so basically, about 12 months ago, we ended up parting ways with one of our co-founders at the time. It's probably one of the most difficult things Laura and I have ever had to do because, like we said before, like we started this company together with a bunch of friends, and so yeah, it was just like it was complicated by that factor. And what ended up happening was this person ended up having just like a really negative outlook to their work and what was going on day to day, and just the company culture ended up suffering. And at the time, we didn't quite grasp how, and we weren't very aware of what company culture was. We just knew that work was suddenly a lot less fun.
Yeah.
Like we weren't like rushing into the office on a day-to-day basis to try and get work done. It was just the whole mood in the office changed, and it was something we didn't think would happen because it's only 1/6 of the company. This was happening like the person was only 1/6, right? But just that one person can have such a massive impact on the rest of the company.
Yeah. It just meant that there was a lot of underlying negativity that we kind of kept sweeping under the carpet because we didn't necessarily want to deal with it.
And it was almost like we didn't know how to deal with it properly either.
We just didn't know how to deal with it because when you leave university and you start a company with your friends, it's all sweet, right? Because you're friends. Nothing bad could possibly happen. But what ended up happening is that we recognized that something needed to be done. We realized that we had to part ways for their benefit and our own. It was very, very difficult to realize this, and it was very, very difficult to get the strength to act on this recognition because we knew for quite some time that we should do something about it, but it's very difficult to instigate, the letting go of a friend from your company that you started together, a person that you've known for a few years, who you studied with. And it got to the point where we really tried to listen to what was happening with them and what was going on with them and tried to adapt the company to that. But ultimately, this person had what's called an external locus of control, which basically means that he would blame everything else other than himself. So he would blame us for not making the company the way that he wanted. He would blame us because he wasn't enjoying his work anymore. And we tried so many different things to change that. And at the end of the day, we realized that we were just on 2 separate paths and we just couldn't get those 2 paths to align anymore. So it actually took our mentors externally to come to us and say, you've really got to do something about this. And at that point in time, that's when we realized that we actually had to make this difficult decision.
Yeah, so like I said before, it is the most difficult thing we've had to do so far in the last 2 years. And I think it was one of those things where like in the lead up, I think we handled it for the most part at the time as best we could have. But I think one of the most difficult things we didn't quite grasp at the time was how to actually deliver this information to our co-founder. Because it wasn't like we were telling some team member who we'd hired that it's just not working out, like we just aren't clicking or whatever. It was this is somebody who was our friend of many years, who had been from working on the project from day one. They had founded the company with us, and here we were telling them that we no longer wanted you to be a part of our journey. And it's impossible to have that conversation without it being very emotionally fueled. And because of that, we ended up being advised to handle the situation in a very professional and almost clinical manner, not just pulling him aside and having the conversation with him one-on-one. It ended up being this very legal way of going about it.
It became a kind of thing where people were advising us to be really careful with what word choice we used. We couldn't message him afterwards because we were advised not to, because you never know how your apology could be, misunderstood or misinterpreted. So it was a really difficult time for us because we knew that our friend was hurting and it was our fault, but we also couldn't reach out. It was a very, very difficult time. It was a decision that was not made lightly. And it is something that we never anticipated would be something we would have to deal with within the first 12 months of the company's life. And it's not something I wish any of you have to go through. But if you do, feel free to hit us up and we can have a really depressing chat about it. But, it happened, and we're still dealing with that decision today, a year later. And it's something that will continue to be a part of the company going forward.
Yep. So moving on to another fun topic to talk about, surviving in the indie scene without any money. This is something that we've slowly been getting better at. It's definitely something we still struggle with. So basically the way we ended up trying to solve this problem that every indie company has to solve is kind of having a combination of funding and part-time and contracting. So in the early days, because we graduated from university together, we ended up having half the team worked part-time and the rest of us kind of had savings that allowed us to work full-time. And then we ended up getting some government grants and all that sort of stuff. And that was kind of how we funded the first 2 years.
In Melbourne, in Victoria, in Australia, we're very lucky to have a government that supports game development. So we are lucky enough to have received 2 grants from Film Victoria to help us make Putty Pals and bring it to the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah. So now that we've shipped the game on the Nintendo Switch, we're starting to branch out into contract work and stuff like that now that we have the experience to kind of leverage. But the main thing I'd want to highlight with this is you've got to work out what works best for your team. And it's going to be an entirely individual thing, but the most important thing is having that open conversation. Because with us, for the most part, it was Laura and I who were working full-time for the first kind of 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
And everyone else was part-time. And this is where that shares conversation came from before. It's just you can't help but feel some degree of underlying resentment almost when you're the one putting in 40 to 50 hours a week and other people are only doing 2. Yeah. And it's something you've got to be comfortable talking about and being open about. Because it's just, when it comes to running a company like this, it's one of the most important things.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing is just making sure it's sustainable. Whatever method you pick, it just has to be sustainable, because having people try and be creative when they're under financial stress it's not conducive to good ideas, because you're constantly preoccupied with how am I going to make rent, how am I going to feed myself this week.
Yeah.
So whatever you end up picking, just make sure that everyone is okay with it and nobody's going to go hungry because of it.
Yeah.
Because that was definitely something that we kind of just went, it'll be all right, and then we paid for it later on down the line.
It's one of the main reasons why now that Putty Pals is out on the Switch, we're focusing on contract work. It's purely to allow everyone to get some kind of income and get through the holiday season. And then next year we can start thinking about what that next project is and start prototyping again. We need that break because the last almost 24 months has been intense as.
Yep.
So this is a break. It's a chance to just get some money in the bank for everyone and money in the company's bank too.
Yeah, because one of the things you always have to be prepared for is, will your project actually be financially successful?
Yeah.
So, for example, we outsold Putty Pals on Steam on the Switch in a day, just because the game did so poorly on Steam, because it's a local co-op game and nobody buys local co-op games on Steam.
Yeah.
And that was just something we had to be very aware of from day one, and we weren't.
Yeah. So when we ask, is your project capable of being a commercial success? It's not necessarily about commercial success so much. If all you want to do is ship a game, awesome, that's a great goal. If it's sell 10,000 copies, cool, that's a good goal. If it's 50,000 copies, awesome. If it's 1 million, good luck. And then tell me your secrets if it happens. But it's more about why are you making this game and what do you want to get out of it at the end. And it's something that we've discussed many times because we realized that we didn't really ask ourselves what that was when we started Putty Pals. Initially, we were just going to ship it because we'd never shipped a game before, so we were like, yeah, sure, let's just ship it. But then we kept getting more and more opportunities to pursue the game and pursue it in terms of a commercial release. And because it was kind of muddy in terms of what we actually wanted out of it, it meant that we, were starting to add features that we probably didn't need to add, which comes to this point about having a marketing plan from day one. We definitely did not have a marketing plan. We didn't even really think about marketing at all.
It was until we picked our launch date on Steam, I think.
Yeah.
So.
And even then, we just kind of plucked a date out of thin air. But when I say marketing plan, it's more about not so much who's going to review it and what kind of YouTubers are you going to get to play it. It's more about figuring out exactly who your target audience is and why that target audience would want to play your game, and also what other games are already out there for that target audience. Because it's not something we've thought about at all in the early days of development, and probably for the first 10 months of development, really. And it really did mean that we ended up making a lot of assumptions about what that audience actually wanted or needed. And it turns out it probably didn't need some of those features we added. So it's really important to think about that from the start, because you might end up having a much more successful game in the long run.
Yeah. And yeah, so the last thing we want to talk about on this slide is, so the stress of running a company is something that never really goes away. It just, what you're stressed about changes, basically.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that we're slowly learning. And yeah, without dwelling on this too much, I think the main thing I want to stress is that when you're starting a company, what you are taking on is the financial responsibility for everyone that you work with and employ. And this is definitely something we had no idea about or didn't think about at all when we first started.
No.
It's a really weird thing to think about, that somebody's relying on you to pay rent and feed themselves and stuff like that. And yeah, it's something that we're slowly coming to grasp with, I guess.
It's getting a little easier now that we have some kind of financial stability. Some kind of financial stability. And the responsibility is getting a little bit easier to deal with, but the stress is still there. But by being able to be open about it with our team and tell them what's up with financials, let them know that we might not get paid for a month, and talking about it openly means that everyone knows what's up, and it means that when we're all stressed, we can talk about it and we're all carrying the burden together, as opposed to just Joe and I kind of carrying this giant boulder on our shoulders. It's better that everyone is up to speed with what's going on. Transparency is really important.
Yeah, so basically we just have a rule that anyone can come up to me at any given time and I can just show them the bank balance, just so everyone's okay and everyone understands where we're at. Cool.
Yeah, so I made this graph for our first ever talk a couple of years ago. 1 year ago.
Yeah,
I'm getting ahead of myself. It feels like I've been in this business for 10 years. This is a graph I made with absolutely no data. I just made it in Paint. But it's kind of a nice visual representation of what our emotional state was like in that first year. at the beginning we were super, super excited because we just started a company. We were going to make a game, we were going to ship it. That's awesome.
Yeah, like this is why we all went to uni, right? Like was to do
Exactly.
exactly this.
But then you get to May, June, it's been like 4 months and you realize you have no money. Your game's probably not going to be that successful. And you're like, shit, have we made a mistake?
Yep.
But then we kind of, looked into funding. We got Film Victoria funding, so you can see the giant spike there because we got money and we were like, oh my God, we have money now.
Yep.
And we could pay ourselves for a little while. But then you can see that it drops again because that's when, things were getting a little bit more stressful. We were having those issues with our co-founder, and so our happiness kind of dipped quite a lot.
Yeah.
But then it spikes again because we showed it PAX Australia and we were a part of Melbourne International Games Week. So we're feeling pretty good. Yep. But then this was year 2. So you thought like this was bad. Then you see this and you're like, oh my God. I don't even know what next year's is going to be like. Let's just hope it's just a steady stream. Maybe like a solid 65 happiness the whole time.
Yep.
I could live with that.
Sure.
Yeah, I doubt it. I really do. The point of this is just to show you that, often indie game development is kind of romanticized and it's a really awesome thing, but it's actually really, really difficult and it takes its toll. And, a lot of the time you feel like this GIF where you kind of are just like, nope, I've had enough. I don't want to deal with this shit anymore. I don't want to deal with trying to figure out how we're going to get money. Like, am I going to be able to eat dinner tonight? Am I having toast for dinner? Or am I having, like, rice? But life isn't perfect. Running a company isn't perfect. Making games isn't perfect. None of us here are perfect. So there will always be days where we feel exactly like this GIF. It's inevitable, right? But the important thing is to remember why we make games in the first place. It's because we love connecting people. We love seeing other people play our games. We love talking about games. So regardless of whether or not you feel like this one day, there'll always be another day where something absolutely awesome happens and it reminds you why you do it in the first place. So thanks for listening to us talk. It's been amazing. It was awesome to travel 30 hours to be here. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Yeah.